Hi there. So, Ira Levin's The Stepford Wives is the second book that I have read for my first attempt at a spooky October. Never done one before. Just never quite happened. Didn't quite get it. Didn't grow up with Halloween. Would imagine that most readers of approximately my age, plus minus a decade or so, would have heard of Ira Levin. He was an American novelist, and while he wasn't prolific like some novelists are, I think he only wrote, I'm going to say maybe just 7 novels. He was a fairly prolific playwright, and there's lots of plays that he wrote. Not that many short stories that I'm aware of, and quite a few scripts. Screenplays and scripts. He wrote a musical as well, which I haven't seen. I'm pretty sure that I have seen one of his plays. Not sure which one. It was a long time ago. And I have, of course, read some of his other books. I think anyone my age read Rosemary's Baby, and I even read the sequel, which I seem to remember wasn't as good. But I haven't encountered Ira Levin for a long time. So when I came across the Stepford Wives in the wild not that long ago, I purchased it and I put it aside for October, and I have just finished it. It is a thin book, which doesn't have that long to it. 159 pages. It has 3 parts. The last one is very short. And I did really enjoy it. So, whilst I'm quite certain that I'd never read The Stepford Wives before, I feel like everyone sort of knows or thinks they knows the actual story. I certainly knew the actual story because I absolutely loved both of the movies. Now, I think there were some TV series and a few odd add-ons, but the 1975 satirical psychological thriller, if you will, by William Goldman, I believe. I loved that one. I thought it was really, really good. And in 2004, another Stepford Wives came out. That one had Nicole Kidman as the main actress. It was directed by Frank Oz. It had a star-studded cast, including Bette Midler, Glenn Close, Christopher Walken. I thought that was really, really good. Now, it did lean more heavily into the comic aspect, but the cast did it so well. I really love that movie. Still love it. I wasn't sure what this was going to be like, and in actual fact, I was thoroughly impressed and a little bit uncertain. It was very, very readable. It flowed very, very fast and very easily from the page, through the eyes to the brain, and I thoroughly enjoyed the whole reading experience. The first part, I kept wondering what it would be like to read this if I didn't know anything about the book other than I picked it off the shelf. Would it still have come across as creepy as it does, that all of Joanne's neighbours are complete, what she calls housewives, with no thought or independent life of their own other than a homemaker for their husbands and multiple children? I think it would. It reads as normalized, but with an edge of creepy that I suspect would still have been every little bit as creepy when it first came out. When did it first come out? Let me just check this. 1972. Now, reading up on it, having actually completed it, there's a few things that people are saying about it. They're saying it's a comment on feminism, it's a comment on masculinity, it's meant to be satirizing a whole heap of different things, and several places that I've read call it a masterpiece of a psychological suspense in a savage community. Well, it's not a savage community. It is so normal that it's enough to raise hives on anyone who's an independent thinker. It's also meant to be a critique of a media-driven society where the pursuit of youth and beauty at all costs is something, and I disagree with that estimation, which I read, I believe, on Goodreads. This isn't really about media-driven society. This is about a small group, a very small insular group that create a set of rules that are completely out of step, as our main character, Joanne, phrases it at one point. Stepford, out of step with the rest of society. Because in the 70s, of course, women's movements and women voters, there's a whole heap of women's stuff happening out there in a way that it isn't really today. Today, 2024, 2025. Oops. Women's place in the community is different to what it was in the 70s. We're not really escaping an overwhelmingly mainstream leaning on us to be housewives, in my personal opinion, in my personal country, as was the case for 1970. There's plenty of challenges for women in society, absolutely, but they're not the same ones as from the 70s. And yet, Joanne herself, our main character, comes across as startlingly modern. As she's written, as she behaves, what she does, with a very few exceptions, she could as well have been written in the last couple of years. It would be as imminent, as relevant. And Joanne's very likable. Joanne Eberhardt. She and her husband have moved to Stepford because the houses are good and the schools are good, and I believe it's a good buy, tax deal, whatever. And then, as I'm sure most of us know the plot of this, she starts to find that she can't actually bond with any of the other women. They're all wives, for a start, which would freak me out right there and then. But it's all nuclear families, man and his wife, and the wife always stays home waxing the ballroom floors in the middle of the night. She finds only 2 women who she can bond with, and both have also moved there fairly recently. Bobby was played in the 2004 movie by Bette Midler, and she was done so well that image is never going to completely be obscured from my mind. And in fact, I think in most regards, Nicole Kidman did such a good job that my internal image and this internal speaker for the voice of Joanne varied between as she's described in the book and, oh, chick, really? And as she's described in the book, she is much more of a 70s figure. She's dark-haired. She's a whole heap of different things. But my mental image of her varied between that and Nicole Kidman. Excuse me, bird. Say hello to the ravening hordes out there who actually like you. Whose rooms you don't wreck. Whose books you don't chew. He would chew books. He totally wants to chew books. So yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about the plot because I feel like everyone knows the plot. In actual fact, Stepford Wives became so iconic that Stepford Wives as a phrase has entered common usage. When you find creepy community of women with no self-autonomy, it's a Stepford Wives moment. So Ira Levin had big influence in that regard. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed this book and I do recommend it. There's some things in it that I don't think really appear in either of the movies. It is much more subtle. In both the movies, you are left with little doubt as to what is being done and that something has been done. You're fairly certain in the book, and it comes across slowly and creepily, and it does it very well. The ending, which I will talk about later as a spoiler, is still very diffuse. There's that spine crawling, I'm not quite sure what's happened, but something has happened and this is wrong feeling in the book, without any true explanation, in the way that both the movies supplied explanations. And in both the movies it was a very science fiction-y type explanation, especially in the 2004 movie. And the 2004 movie had an ending that was far more contemporary satisfying. Contemporary readers may not find the ending for this as satisfying, and I was startled by it. Okay, so if you like Ira Levin and you haven't read the Stepford Wives, I think you should. If you liked either of the Stepford Wives movies, you may like this. If you didn't like the first one, but you did like the 2004 one, you may not like this. But in any case, I think this is an excellent book, and I think you should read it to find out if you like it or not. None of that was spoilers. From now on, spoilers. So if you have this book and you haven't read this book, and you're going to read it sometime soon, or you think that you don't want to know what the ending is, go away now. Shoo shoo, go away, read good books. But if you have read it already, or if you don't think you're going to, listen on. So what you've got is these three parts. The first part ends sort of in the middle of nowhere. Joanna and Bobby have decided that it's a 3-month thing. They made one other friend there, Charmaine, that's it, who had a tennis court where at first Joanna could go to play tennis. She expressed less than total devotion and adulation to her husband. She felt like a real person. And then she changed. She dismissed her maid. She started doing all her own housework. She refused to have opinions or get together with her friends, right? And then that was when Bobby got super paranoid. She said, this happens to all women here. It's something in the water. It's something in the air. She starts drinking bottled water. She's thoroughly paranoid. And both Bobby and Joanna want to leave Stepford, but both of their husbands are dragging their heels. And we, as the readers and the people who've watched the movies, we know what's happening. And so it's even more creepy for us. But I suspect that if you didn't know, I think it would read just as creepily. And just as sneaky. And because it's such a thin book, the small hints and sneaks are really good. Okay, Charmaine has suddenly turned into a Stepford wife, a total zombie. Bobby is paranoid. Next thing we know, it's winter, and Bobby and Joanna have figured out it's a 3-month thing. Joanna is starting to get really worried. And next thing you know, at the beginning of part 2, Bobby gets Stepford wived and turns into an utter zombie. And here again, the images from the 2004 movie were with me in a big way because Bette Midler did a fantastic job in that movie, in my opinion. And that look of horror that Nicole Kidman got would often meld in my mind with Joanna in here. Joanna in this book is a photographer. And I can't remember if that was the case in the movies or not, because if so, it wasn't probably a huge part of the plot. But one thing in this book that I don't remember from either of the movies is that Joanne goes down into the basement and starts researching when all the men's club leaders started joining and where they all worked and what they're all doing. And she gets an image in her head, which is very lightly portrayed to us, the reader, that because all these men had parts in robotics, chemical companies, a whole heap of other things, that is how they are doing it. Towards the end of part 2, when she is thoroughly freaked out and paranoid and sure she's about to become Stepford wife, at that point she's talking robots. The women are being replaced with robots. And the end of part 2 leaves you in a complete suspense moment. Are they robots or are they not robots? Just moving these books out of the way of the small gnawing beak of my personal dinosaur. Are they robots? Aren't they robots? And what exactly happens to Joanne as she's trying to run away from her husband? We don't know. Part 3 begins, and the one woman that moved there after Joanne and her husband meets Joanne at the supermarket, and she's a Stepford wife. And we never really know what happens. And it's an abrupt ending compared to the movie endings, and it felt initially very abrupt to me, and I wasn't sure about it. But even as I was closing the book and sitting back on the beach, as you can tell, I've got sunburn, to think about it, I'm going, no, I actually like this ending. It's a different ending from the film, but the book is different from the films. It's a different reading experience, and this is honestly much more of a horror type ending than the films, because in the 2004, it's an upbeat ending. The husband supports his wife. He doesn't let her be zombified. But in here, Her husband has thoroughly been converted to this whole Stepford Men's Club, Men's Association thing. And the grim end is when she becomes a zombie herself. So, one of the controversial elements to this story, this book particularly as I understand it, is the inference that all men only want zombie type women. Beautiful, always keep themselves beautiful for their man, stay home, do all the housework, perfect Hausfrau, as the phrase that's used here. And there's a lot of argument back and forth over that. I think it's quite obviously not true, but argument. Anyway, as a standalone horror, it will work very well for most people. As a psychological suspense, it kept me suspended every step of the way. And as a social commentary, I think a lot of people can enjoy it. So there's many different levels on which to enjoy this very short, very satisfying October read. Very glad I found it. Very glad I read it. Am now on the look for the other Ira Levins, which I haven't read. One of which, if I'm not mistaken, is actually a science fiction one. The Perfect Day, which won an award. My understanding is it's science fiction. So fingers crossed, find it somewhere today. And now, good people, go away and read good books. Thank you for watching.